So this is our last week of our Hope and Healing series. It's been, I think, a great series for us to do for this time of the year and what's happening in our world at this time. And we've talked about several different things. So we're going to end with what I've titled the sermon as Jesus Heals a Leper. And I'm going to read. We're doing a little bit different today. I'm not putting the scripture on the screen today because they're just 4 short verses. The whole story is 4 short verses. And so as I read that today, I'm going to invite you to get in the position that you best listen. And, you know, for some of us, we kind of close our eyes and visualize what's going on. For others, it's staring off into space, whatever it is. Are you ready? You ready to hear this great story? Very short story. Here it is. Now, when Jesus had come down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. A man with skin disease or leprosy, in most of the translations, a man with leprosy or skin disease came, kneeled before him and said, "Lord, if you want, you can make us clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched him, saying, I do want to become clean. Instantly, his skin disease was cleansed. Jesus said to him, "Don't say anything to anyone. Instead, go and show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded. This will be a testimony to them." And so our passage today, our story today, starts with Jesus telling us, or starts telling us that Jesus came down from the mountainside and that large crowds followed him. Now, Jesus had just finished preaching his infamous, it became infamous because of the hard teaching that some of it is, the Sermon on the Mount. You're familiar with that in chapter 7 of Matthew. And so he teaches that and he preaches this great sermon, one of probably the greatest sermon of all times. And when he gets through, this is what the people were saying. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, preaching this sermon on the Mount, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. But think about it. Did Jesus really have authority where they were at? And here's the thing. If Jesus had authority, what would that mean? If Jesus really had authority, what would that mean? What would that look like? Well, I think this story today gives us a sneak peek at what Jesus' authority looks like in practice, what it looks like out on the streets. The first situation that Jesus faces when he's coming down the mountain and onto the streets is this man with leprosy. So let's talk for a minute about skin disease and leprosy in the New Testament times. Now, probably not all cases declared leprosy in that day were actually Hansen's disease, as we know it today, or actually leprosy. There were several skin diseases, disorders that were declared leprosy, such as psoriasis, some other things that might continually irritate the skin or cause the skin to scab up and turn maybe lighter colors or be blotched. And people watched that, and as they saw that, they would be careful about that, and then if it got worse, then they would declare it to be leprosy. But what's important in the story today about the man with the leprosy or with the skin disease is that any person with any skin disease like this was treated as if they had leprosy. They were treated as if it was the worst of the worst diseases that there was. I mean, the physical condition of a leper was terrible. But I mean, if you had true leprosy, the Hansen's disease, you would die an inch at a time, is the way I've heard it put, as your fingers and arms, your legs, whatever, would just continually, just slowly rot off. And a person's lifespan at most would be 9 years if that was the actual disease that was had. Now, the Jewish historian, there's something that made leprosy even worse than dying an inch at a time. The Jewish historian Josephus, we get so much information from Josephus back from around Jesus' time, but he tells us that lepers were treated as if they were in effect dead, as if they were already dead people. As soon as leprosy was diagnosed, the leper was absolutely and completely banished from human society. No relationship with anybody else. It was just as if you were dead. They mourned you. You were done. You had to sit outside the town walls. You couldn't be a part of anything that was going on. And this comes from Leviticus, actually Leviticus chapter 13, where they're given how they're supposed to handle people who have leprosy. And it says this: the leper shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Now, this would have been when they were still traveling. So outside of where the rest of them would live. And now that they're in towns and villages, it would be outside of the town or the city walls. But can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would have felt like, what it must have felt like to be a leper? To be totally outcast, to be totally rejected by everyone. You seriously are dead to the world. Your family, everybody else, they had already mourned your loss. You were dead to them. Maybe some of us can, at least in some ways. I've heard it said, for over the last several months that COVID-19 is the new leprosy. Have you heard that? It's the new leprosy, And I don't know about that, but I would say that it is interesting to watch people avoid you after you've had COVID. Having had that, it's like, it's like everybody finds a different way to go around, even though it's long past and you're not contagious yet. We are very, very concerned about that in our society right now. And I'm not saying it's a wrong thing. I'm just saying once you've had it, I've heard that said. But in Jesus' day, no one would even think of greeting a leper. Seriously. It's said that one rabbi wouldn't even eat an egg that was bought on the street that a leper had walked down. If a leper had come in had not followed the rules and walked through town, the rabbi would not buy an egg that was bought on the street that this person had walked by. Another rabbi had said, from historical stuff, actually boasted that he had thrown stones at lepers in order to keep them away. Other rabbis that say would hid from lepers or run as fast as they could from the lepers. They would run the other way. Even if the sight of the leper was at a distance, they would go as far as they didn't want to become unclean. They didn't want to get close to the bad stuff, the negative stuff, the yuck in the world. There's probably never been a disease that has so separated one human being from another the way leprosy did in history. And yet it was the leper that Jesus touched when he came down from the mountainside. Now, to a Jew in the time of Jesus, there could be no more amazing sentence than the simple statement, Jesus reached out his hand and touched a man with leprosy. What an ordeal. Something you were commanded not to do with good reason because it was contagious. And yet Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man that had leprosy. Can you imagine the gasps from the crowds? Can you imagine the shudder going through the onlookers as Jesus not only got closer than the 18 inches or whatever that, I don't know their measurement, but it was about 18 inches that you could not get closer than to a person with leprosy than that. And Jesus goes past that. Today it'd be 6 foot, right? He went past the 6 foot and he touched. I got some news today, and I'll tell you, Deb Richardson, she was put on hospice this morning. And Howard came by, and we were practicing in the band, and of course I'm playing the keyboard today, and so I was over there, and Howard had me come down here, and so I just kind of lost it for a minute because Deb's been a big part of this church. Her mom died of this same type thing, and she has multiple, is it MS? MS, and so she just, for a week and a half, she's been just kind of there, and they put her on hospice, and I just kind of lost it, and I was sitting over here in a chair. I told the band, I said, you have to wait a minute, and so I just kind of put my head down, and you know, we're doing our best to keep our social distancing. We're wearing a mask, and we're doing everything we can to try to be safe and to model that kind of behavior up here. And in a minute, I felt a hand here and a hand there, and they had no idea what was going on. But they went beyond the 6-foot barrier to reach out to somebody who was hurting. What a beautiful picture. Now, I hope you guys use hand sanitizer. But what a beautiful picture of what Jesus did to this leper. The gasps, the shuddering, and yet Jesus reaches out beyond the 18 inches for them. He touches this poor man. But on the other side of this thing, think about the warmth. Think about the thrill of a physical touch when Jesus touched this leper himself. Nobody had touched him maybe for a long time. It could have been years. It could have been years. And here he was, suddenly, to his surprise, he's caught up in God's kingdom movement. Here he is right there in the middle of it. He was the outsider a minute ago. And here is God's touch embracing him. Now, I don't know why the leper felt compelled to come and kneel before Jesus, calling him Lord. Now, it's a big word. It was important to them, and it's an important word even today. But he called him Lord, and he said to him with confidence, if you're willing, you can make me clean. If you're willing, you can do it. He didn't say, if you're willing, or he didn't say, I know you're willing, but do you have the power? He didn't say that. He said, if you're willing, I know you can. You have the power. So we've got to remember that the Sermon on the Mount, that right before the Sermon on the Mount began, the short history before that, we're told that Jesus went throughout Galilee. He's teaching in the synagogues. He's preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness among the people. And the word says that the news spread about Jesus. So perhaps the leper had been told about Jesus by someone who had been healed. Maybe it was one of those people that was also an outsider that was set outside of the gate of the city who also had no one to touch them. And Jesus had healed that person. And he had come back to this leper, this guy, and said, hey, if you ever get to see Jesus, you've got to have him heal you. It has changed everything in my life. Maybe he had heard Jesus teaching on the mountainside. Maybe he sat on the other side behind Jesus where the others wouldn't be, and maybe he listened. And he believed that Jesus was capable of healing him. So whatever the reason for the leper's belief, he approached Jesus with confidence. He seemed to have little doubt that Jesus could do it if he just wanted to. He could make him clean. And so reaching out his hand and touching this man, Jesus replies, I'm willing, be clean. And here's the thing, that is what Jesus will do for any of us. Anyone who will just ask and believe, Lord, if you're willing, if we'll believe this, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean, God will do that. Jesus has the power to heal. See, Jesus has authority. Jesus has real authority, real power over everything, and anything that entangles us, even death itself. Jesus' authority and power provides people with a new life, with a way out of what's causing them to struggle. You see, in Jesus Christ, there's no giving up on a person because Jesus doesn't. And because we have Jesus. In Jesus Christ, there's no such thing as a dead man who is still breathing, because Jesus is alive and Jesus is in us. And so we reach out. We do ministry. We make connection with people that others might consider a dead person walking, like a leper. You see, this leper not only needed physical healing, but he also needed to be reintegrated back into society. He needed to get back with his family. He needed to get back into his village. See, it wouldn't have done much good in that day for this leper to have been healed and then to go home and try to claim that he was cured, because they wouldn't have accepted that. And so he had to have official authorization. So a person with leprosy who had been cured could not re-enter society until that person had been officially pronounced clean by a priest, and there was a process they had to go through. So Jesus said to him, "Go show yourself to the priest." Now, I want you to notice a couple of things. First off, Jesus did not follow the law by keeping his distance. He did not follow the law when he reached out and touched this man who so desperately needed his touch. And yet he did honor the law by sending this former leper to the local priest to go through all the rituals that were required to be declared clean and free from leprosy. When Jesus had finished preaching to the crowds, the people were amazed at his teaching, it says, because he had taught as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. So then Jesus, when he comes down from the mountain, he gave a hint of what his authority looked like in this healing of this man with leprosy and restoring him as a member of his community, as a part of God's people. So maybe a question we should ask ourselves is this: what does it mean to recognize and submit to the authority of Jesus Christ? What does that mean? What does it mean to call Jesus Lord? What does that word Lord mean? Well, it means that we give them authority over our lives. We give them the power to make decisions and do things for us. Yeah, I heard a person say this past week that to accept Jesus as Lord means that if we read His Word, Holy Scripture, and we disagree with it, then we must assume that we're wrong and not that the Bible is wrong. If Jesus is Lord and that's His Word. And that's one aspect. Nowhere in the New Testament does it suggest that faith in God, this is another part of the story, is about the faith that this man had. It doesn't suggest that faith in God is some general awareness of some supernatural dimension somewhere. Well, that's a lot of out there, isn't it? Nor does the Bible give any indication that faith is some kind of trust in the goodness of some far-off, distant deity. As the song once said, from a distance, God is watching us. No, what the Bible shows us in this story particularly, and time again, is that God is up close and personal. God is with us. And faith in Christian terms means believing that the one living God in Jesus Christ and the authority, we believe in the authority of His Word to guide us, using that authority for the salvation for all who will believe. Jesus has authority over death, over sickness, and Jesus chooses to use that authority to bring us hope and healing. Hope and healing. Imagine the man. His family had given up on him. They'd pronounced him dead. They didn't even recognize him when they walked by him out of the city because he was already dead. Jesus comes by and touches him. He's restored to life. I would suggest that we have some people in our community that need restoration to life. I'm going to suggest that God would use you and me, if we're willing, to reach out to some of those outsiders, to some of those who other people just don't get, that just don't want to be around, that just consider them too far gone for them to associate with because it will hurt their image. I believe that God has some people in our community that He's wanting us to reach in His name. You look later in Scripture, He says, I give you authority. All authority. And as followers of Jesus, I believe that's what He's called us to do. I want to read these 4 verses, just 4 verses, one more time, that tell the story of this man with skin disease or leprosy. Because I think these verses show us who God is and what authority God has and how God chooses to use that authority in Jesus Christ. So listen one more time. Now when Jesus had come down from the mountain, large crowds followed Him. A man with skin disease or leprosy came, kneeled before Him. Lord, if you want, you can make me clean. Not, Lord, if you can, would you try? But Lord, if you want, you can make me clean. And Jesus reached out His hand and touched him, breaking the law, saying, I do want to become, Jesus reached out His hand and touched him, saying, I do want to become clean. And then comes the word that is the word of our society today. This is our word. We love this word. We live by this word. It is the most important word in our vocabulary. Instantly, right? Instantly, immediately, instantly. His skin disease, his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, don't say anything to anyone. Instead, go immediately and show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded. And this will be a testimony to them. When you see the person that so desperately needs someone to touch them, I believe we have the authority of Jesus Christ as His followers to reach out, to go past the law, to go through the 6-foot barrier that we've placed in our society today and touch the person who's hurting. Because it will fill their soul. It will fill their soul.